Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm really excited because I've decided to film my first recommendations video. And I wanted to take this opportunity to spread the love about classics. And I think one of the things that can be intimidating about classics, other than the feeling you might have that the language will be too difficult or anything like this, is that some of them are really chunky. And I totally get that. I am someone who gets really intimidated by big books. So I thought I would put together a little list of 10 books that are under 200 pages and that are, in my opinion, great classics if you want to give it a go and you want to start with something small. So I'm gonna go from the shortest to the longest, and I've tried to put together different types, different genres, and hopefully you'll find something in there to interest you. The first one I want to talk about is a dystopian novella by Forster, and it's called The Machine Stops. And this was first published in 1909, and it is a story in which we follow a mother and her son, and they live in a version of our Earth which has completely changed. The surface of the Earth is essentially uninhabitable, and all humanity has constructed their lives underground. And they are kind of governed by this all-knowing machine that feeds them and also allows them to communicate. So there are instances of me reading this where I thought, oh my god, this guy was talking about the internet. This is such an interesting dystopian story. It's freakishly scary when you think about what things are talked in about this in terms of how humans communicate and how the Earth is and how that affects their relationship to each other. That feels scarily contemporary. It's super short. It's I think around 50 pages, and you can get it in these modern classics from Penguin. It's really great. I have never read anything else by Forster's, but I plan to. But even if you haven't read anything else by him, I highly recommend this. The second book I want to talk about is Die Verwandlung by Franz Kafka, so in English, The Metamorphosis. This really short novella was published in 1915, and it's about this man who is a salesman, and he wakes up one day in the morning and finds out that he was turned into a giant insect. And it's about how he navigates his life and how his relationship with people around him, with his family and everyone else, degrades, and he is more and more shunned by the society. Now, this novella is completely crazy. I think it's brilliant. It's open to so many interpretations about society and the feeling of otherness. I just really like it, and I think it's also a really interesting place to start with classics. The next one I want to mention is a French classic, and it's Huis, Clos by Jean-Paul Sartre. This is an existentialist play written in the 1940s, and it follows three people, one man and two women, who are finding themselves sitting in this mysterious waiting room, and they don't really know why they're there, and they start to talk to each other, and it turns out each of them has done something really bad. And the whole play is essentially some kind of metaphor about the afterlife and these three people being condemned forever to be in the company of each other. This play is so brilliant. I read it first at school and I was so blown away, and it's also one that gives you a lot to think about, but it's also really accessible in terms of language, so highly recommend this as well. The next one is a sci-fi novel, and it's The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This was first published in 1897, and it follows mostly a man who lives in the English countryside when England is essentially attacked by giant cylinders that fall from the sky, and out of them come some very peculiar creatures that start building machines and essentially look like they want to invade the world. And it follows this man and his journey through England, trying to escape from these aliens that are taking over the world. I have talked about this book in my last wrap-up. I will link it up here and down below. I absolutely love this classic. I feel like if you like sci-fi, you will definitely like this. If, like me, you are not so great with sci-fi, you will also enjoy it. It has a lot to say about class and colonialism and xenophobia and many, many other things. It's a great book to dissect and to talk about. I think it's a great book to buddy read. So yeah, all these reasons to get to this book. The next one is a more modern classic, and it's Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which was first published in 1937. This follows two men, George and Lenny, who is mentally disabled, and they are both drifters in Southern California. So they are essentially farm workers who drift from farm to farm to get work. They get this job in this farm where they are supposed to pick some fruits, and as a misunderstanding comes up, things start unraveling from there. This novel really draws you in. It gets really tense in the end, and the end is just so good. I really, really recommend this book. It's really not long. It's, I think, 120 pages. And John Steinbeck is just a really, really good writer. I can't wait to get to some of his bigger books. The next book I want to mention is Passing by Nella Larsen. This novel is set in Harlem in the 1920s, and it revolves around two childhood friends, Irene and Claire. And this book explores race and gender and sexuality and how mixed race people were viewed at that time. And some of them practiced racial passing, which means that they assimilated themselves into white society to fit in. This is such an interesting book. It explores many, many really interesting topics. The characterization of these women is really good. The writing is also really good. And if you're interested in any of these topics, I would highly recommend you to give it a go. Next up, I have a mystery book, and it's The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is one of the more unusual Sherlock Holmes books, and its structure is interesting because it's split into different timelines and places, and they're somehow connected. In one, we have Sherlock Holmes, who investigates the death of a man in his estate in Sussex, and on the other side, we have a Pinkerton detective in Chicago who goes into this mining town to infiltrate a violent gang. This book is really an interesting one if you like mystery stories, and even if you have read other Sherlock Holmes stories, this one is really an unusual one and really interesting one, and it's short, so I recommend it. Next, I want to mention a children's classic, and it's one of the Narnia books, The Silver Chair, which is the fourth in the publishing order, but it's the second to last one of the Chronicles of Narnia series. I'm mentioning this because right now it's my personal favorite, so obviously I'm a bit biased. Many of you might know the line The Witch in the Wardrobe, and maybe also The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, or maybe Prince Caspian, but this happens later, and this actually follows Eustace, who you might know as the cousin of the four Pevensey children, and he is drawn back into Narnia along with his school friend Jill, because the son of now King Caspian has disappeared, and they are traveling Narnia to find clues about what might have happened to him. I really, really like this book. I enjoy the characterization of the children, and there is also some exploration of bullying in school and some really, really important topics in my eyes for children. And I think it's also quite an underrated one from the series, so that's why I'm mentioning it in here. So if you haven't checked out any of the Narnia books before, you definitely should. They're really short, really engaging, very absorbing into the story, really, really great reads. Alright, we're coming to the second to last book, and I'm mentioning another dystopian, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. You might probably have heard of this book. It is an important cornerstone of dystopian fiction, in my opinion, and definitely along with 1984. This is also the first dystopian novel I ever read, and I think it's a really good introduction to the genre in terms of classics. This follows a fireman called Guy Montag, and in this version of our Earth, firemen don't put out fires, they are generating the fires. And one of the applications of this is that they have to track down and find books and burn them, because in this society, reading and preserving books is a crime. And obviously, as you might imagine from this storyline, the book has a really interesting exploration of censorship and collective memory and stories we tell each other and what importance books have in that respect. It's just a really, really important read. It's very readable. It's very easy to read also from the language. I read this in English at school in France, so you know, especially if you're a native English speaker, shouldn't be any problem at all. Yeah, it's a really, really great dystopian book, and I really recommend it as well. And last but not least is a book of short stories by one of my favorite authors, Guy de Maupassant. I'm talking about his fantastical stories, his horror stories, titled in this edition by Horla. This was published in 1887, and essentially this whole collection explores horror, the fantastical, and madness. And for example, in the title story, we follow this bourgeois man who has a very nice house on the banks of a river, and he starts getting more and more crazy because he swears that since he saw this beautiful boat coming from South America and waving at it, he feels that his house is haunted by an unnatural presence. These stories are very, very short. It's really nice to dip in and out of this collection. You have a wide range of different stories and themes and settings, and I just love Maupassant's realistic writing, but at the same time it's really lyrical. Yeah, I mean, I cannot recommend him enough, and I cannot recommend this collection enough. If you are into like scary ghost stories or horror, this might just be the classic for you. Okay guys, that's it. These were the 10 small classics that I wanted to present to you today. I hope that you have found something in there that might interest you. And if you do, let me know down in the comments down below. I would really like to know if you want to pick up any of these, and if you also have other recommendations of books that are similar to these. I'm always happy to hear about them. I hope you're having a great day today and that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!